Hi folks, we're going to start up in a minute. Just getting myself sorted out down here in the studio. Back after electrical. Here, bright and ready to go. Someone's asking me, where's Smash by a really cool question.
Территория 25, ПК, движение 24.
class here. Team. Starting up a lecture now. So who have we got online? I believe. Zero, I've got one viewer. I think it's myself. And on rescreen, 15 viewers on YouTube. That suggests that it's time to have a lecture, my folks. I've got a critical matters. It's time to roll. Super quiet. It's because I haven't started the lecture yet. I wonder why I would be super quiet. I'll open up my screen and see what's going on. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I don't know why I would be quiet. Is there any particular reason? Sound. Sometimes things can go crazy in my sound. Input. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I don't know. Is that, I mean, it seems okay on the dials. Why is it super quiet here? Start my recording and go RHS small. G'day folks, I'm just debugging my OBS for a second before we start. Mic aux. Uh-oh. Mic aux, I get like a reasonable level. It's -6. That seems like a little bit quiet, doesn't it? I'll just kick the gain up a little bit. See if I can get into the -5s. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It doesn't go any higher. I'm just going to be distorting if I do that. What's up with that? Why is it stuck on -6? Advanced audio properties. Mic aux. Coming from that one, that's correct. Very strange, isn't it? Kick it up by 2 dB. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Now it's even quieter. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. If I take that down, it's quiet. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Well, I don't feel like I'm super quiet. I feel like I might be a little bit quiet. Why would I be super quiet? 1, 2, 3. Look, it's coming. It says 0 on my input. That's just going to distort if I push it any further than that. -6 here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I feel like I might have just been clashing with the audio. Maybe it was some YouTube Twitch compression stuff. Melody. Thank you for the in real-time audio feedback. This is, after all, another lecture about audio. So good if we get the audio right. Good morning, folks. Welcome to COMP1720/6720. We are back after the lecture break. I hope that you are ready for fun, ready for art making, ready for exciting times with audio, sound, and computing. We had a lecture on sound and music computing before the break, which was your kind of first part lecture on how to do this. You get a second part now where we focus a little bit more on like inspiration to do with sound art and synthesis and a little bit of history, and then we'll get stuck into some example work that I've been working on, something that might, I don't know, be some inspiration for our assignment, and we'll talk a bit about the assignments. That's the topic for this week, looking at the second half of sound and music computing, making sure you're aware of this. The sound and music stuff in this course can be a little bit tricky to get your head around, so I've got these 2 lectures to cover it just in this quiet period around the lecture break when people tend to be focused on other assignments, maybe some exams. It's good to just have a little bit more time to let this idea settle in. so that we can use it in the assignment, because I really want people to make good use of sound and audio in this course, not boring, annoying use, because it can be boring and annoying. This was the admin from last time. I'll just close that. I don't need Teams over here. In fact, I don't even want Teams over here. No, get rid of that. Oh, why is Teams so hard to quit on Linux? Is it gone? Yes, it's gone. No Teams. This is the admin for this week. A little bit different, a few different things. Assignment 2, we've completed the marking for that. We will return your marks and feedback later today in Gradebook. Your next challenge is Assignment 3. Next challenge is Assignment 3. And before I look at Assignment 3, we'll talk about that a bit. A few admin arrangements to be aware of. If you're in the lab on Thursday this week, Thursday in Australia is now a public holiday. As a result, we've moved the lab from Thursday to Friday morning at 10 a.m. So if you're a Thursday lab person, you can go to that Friday lab. You're also very welcome to go to a different lab in the week if that is more appropriate for you. Sorry about that. We didn't know that there would be a public holiday, and it was a snap announcement. So, sudden announcement that there's a public holiday. Unfortunately, that disrupts our class. But we can make up for it on Friday. So, Thursday, people, if there's any issues with that, please let me know. It is really important that you go to your labs this week. The week 7 labs is related to sound and music computing, so it's a very important lab to go to. Labs, which one is it? Week 7, interacting collections. It's all about making basically an abstract artwork with sound, which is kind of exactly what the assignment is. So it's a preparation lab for your assignment. And it will let you get started with something. It gives you a lot of support on that. I'll also give you some support in this lecture. So important lab, I don't want folks to miss it. Next 2 weeks is also a little bit disrupted. Next week I'm actually away, so there'll be a guest lecture from somebody else. Not quite sure on the detail yet, but we'll get that out to you, information out on the forum later this week. By default, it'll be the same time. It'll be one of the wonderful tutors and staff on the course who will be giving that lecture. So a great alternative voice than hearing me every Monday. Week 9, Monday of week 9 is also a public holiday. I've just gone through my calendar and found that the best time to do a lecture that week is Friday. So there'll be no lecture early on Monday in that week, but I will have a lecture on Friday. There's always a public holiday in that week, so the course is kind of designed around it, and there's a short lecture that week, which is really the first bit of preparation for your major project. So we can have a look at now, well, thinking about what is left in this course, there's 2 things left. Assignment 3 and your major project. Assignment 3 and your major project. Let's just have a look at the assessments. Assignment lab tasks, those keep going until week 11. Assignment 1, that's done. Assignment 2, completely done. Assignment 3, gonna be done soon, due 4th of October. And a major project, which is due at the end of October. So you now have, 2 and a bit weeks to do, or just over 2 weeks, 2 weeks and a day, I guess, to do assignment 3. So it's now time to look at that, make sure that you get that started. We have assignment 3 at this specific time so that you have enough time to do the major project with no clashes or interruptions. So I can't change the date of assignment 3 to give you more time on that. We need to get through it and get onto the major project so you have sufficient number of weeks for that project. Just working backwards, the major project is your final artwork in this course. You'll have a lot more freedom in this one. What you have to do is create an interactive artwork that reflects a specific theme. I haven't released the theme yet. We'll probably get this finalized and released by the end of the week. You get scaffolded to do this work through the last 3 labs. What is this week? Week 9, major project storyboard. Week 10, starting your major project, the last 4 labs. Week 11, iterating, revising, and pruning. And week 12, working on your major project. We've got 4 labs entirely dedicated to help you decide what to do, start creating something, iterate on it, make it better, improve it, to get your work into really good shape. So you get a lot of support for the major project. But that means that we need to get assignment 3 done and dusted by the start of week 9, that first Tuesday. Let's look at assignment 3 then. Assignment 3, abstract sonic artwork. So, in this assignment, you'll be doing something quite different than what you did in the first two, because in the first 2 assignments, you were creating a representational artwork. It was an artwork that was about something. About a monster, about a workstation. In this artwork, you're going to make an abstract artwork, which is a little bit different. Artworks don't always have to be about showing a picture of a person or a house or a thing that exists in the world. You can create abstract works that aren't representing anything in particular. So, the other dramatic departure in this artwork is that you're including sound. And in fact, sound is in the title. And we're calling it a sonic artwork. So it's not just an abstract interactive work, it's an abstract interactive artwork that is focused on sound. So you need to use the skills that you're learning about sound and music computing over these few weeks and put them into this assignment. So we've got a few little tweaks in how this assignment works, because throughout this course we're leveling up your understanding and experience with interaction. So this artwork should be engaging and coherent. Those are things that you should now be comfortable with after the first 2 assignments. It needs to use interaction, and I think you're starting to know how to do that, but it needs to use interaction to enhance experience of the viewer. So it's not just about providing a reward in something, it's about providing a continuing experience that gets better. The interaction, we need the sound and visuals to work together coherently and to invite a viewer to engage in the work. The interaction in your work should engage the viewer in exploration and set up a feedback loop between the viewer and the artwork. So we talked about this in week 5. What makes an interaction engaging is when the viewer does something, or the artwork invites the viewer to do something somehow, the viewer interacts with it, the artwork gives them some reward to that, and that leads to a continual cycle of interaction and feedback, and then the artwork evolves, or the experience evolves over that time into an enhanced experience over this loop of interactions. So I guess the one thing about this artwork, or one thing that really defines that, is that you'll need to have some part of your artwork know whether it's been interacted in the past and interact differently in future because of that. So something should change over time in your artwork. It's in the workstation, it was enough, I guess, just to have a few things that you'd click on that would exist independently. That would be fine. Independent little interactions, that would be fun and rewarding. But in this artwork, they need to work together so that there's a feedback loop and things change over time, which enhances the experience. So you should represent a deepening of experience by allowing viewers to open new scenes or significant transformations of the work through interaction. This means that this assignment is a significant departure. Okay, so let's have a look at the requirements. It needs to be abstract. What does that mean? You can use forms, colors, lines, and sounds that are not intended to reference or represent the real world. It should not use characters or representations of real objects. So you can be inspired by the shape of something and have shapes in your artwork, but you can't, create a character and have them talking to each other and having a conversation or something. So this is going to be a little bit of a challenge for some folks who I know really go deep into the character-driven art or specific objects interacting. But we're just going to use the basic forms, colors, lines, and sounds. We talked about this in week 1, that kind of abstract art. This needs to be a sound artwork. You have no choice but to include sound in this work. Very important. Your artwork should have a significant sonic component using both synthesized and sampled sounds. You can't just use either synthesized or sampled. You need to use those 2 things together somehow. Up to you to work out how to do that. This needs to be interactive. You should be able to interact with this artwork using the keyboard and mouse. You can have other ways of interacting with it as well, but be very careful about what the viewer is expected to have on their computer. When we mark this, we will definitely have a keyboard and mouse, but we can't take for granted we'll have different things. So if you've got a specific kind of interaction in mind, you should ask about it. This needs to be engaging and coherent, similar to the last one, and the interaction needs to enhance the experience. So it means that interacting with your work needs to reveal aspects that are not available without interaction, and deeper interaction leads to more engaging experiences. Another difference in this one is that we've been changing the size of the sketch. So it started as a little square in your browser, then it was a big rectangle, and now the sketch is going to take up the whole window. So you need to use fractions of width and height to draw and calculate interactions in this work. So it's a full experience for the viewer. Usual sketch.js file, a usual artist statement, but the artist statement has a slightly different requirement this time. The usual statement of originality, at least 2 references, as usual. I'll just talk a little bit about must-nots, because in this assignment you are required to use sampled sounds. That means you'll have to include some kind of sound file in your sketch. In this one, you're allowed to use both image files and sound files. But in each case, you've only got 2 choices as to where to get those files. The first choice, and the one that I really encourage folks to use, is that if you want to use an image file, create it yourself, either with a camera, with an art program, any way, create an image yourself. If you're using an image from the internet, it can only come from one place, and that's unsplash.com. That is your only choice. You may not Google for clip art and include random pictures from around the internet. It may be that there are random images from around the internet that you really want to use and they have an appropriate license. I'm sorry, that's just not allowed. Your only choice is either your own camera or digital art software or unsplash.com. Similarly, you can only include sound files that you create yourself, e.g. by recording sound with your phone or creating sound in another sound package on your computer, a synthesizer or other kind of sound design tools. Or if you don't want to do that, you can get sounds from a website called freesound.org, which has exclusively Creative Commons licensed sounds. If you include, or you must include a sound file in your sketch, any sound file and any image file, even if you created it yourself, I need a reference to it in your statement of originality. Any sound file needs to be referenced, okay? If it's your own sound file, it's a reference to yourself. Why am I asking you to do this? Because forever in this class, I get folks including image files and sound files from random places on the internet that are not cited correctly in their statement of originality, and I end up having to have academic integrity meetings with folks to work out whether they created the artwork themselves or whether they're using files from the internet. So I just need to be super duper clear. Everything you include in your sketch, I assume that it is not your work unless you're specifically telling me it is your work in your statement of originality. It's not a negotiation at this point. It's just something that we have to do to make sure that I understand and the marker understands where all of the assets come from in your artwork. And it should be easy, right? All of these are going to be assets that you hopefully have created yourself. You've recorded with your phone or created some other way, or taken photos or created them in Photoshop. And you can just include a citation saying, this is my image. So don't include too many assets, otherwise it's going to be really hard to do those references. Artist statement, one last thing. The artist statement questions have changed a little bit. You need to, in this example, explain what your interactive artwork is and how the interaction enhances the viewer's experience. So that's answering the experience, the enhance experience requirement. So this is well, where's my must required? Must do something. Must use interaction to enhance experience. I'm missing a word there, to enhance experience. I'll fix that later. So you have to explain how you've answered this specification in your statement, your artist statement. So that should be, oh, there's a question here coming up. I'll answer it in a minute. you must make sure you answer that in the artist statement. The question is, are we allowed to collaborate with musicians, friends, e.g. sampling instruments? Just wondering. You must not include sound files unless you have created them yourself, e.g. with the record function on your phone, or they have come from freesound.org. So if your musician friend sends you a sound file, that's not allowed. You haven't created it yourself. If you are recording a musician with their permission, then you need to make sure you're very clear about how that works in your statement of originality in terms of citing that. So that would be obviously when recording things or taking photos, there can be an object as well as the recorder, the person who's doing the recording. That's partly your work. You would be partly credited to that. I wouldn't necessarily encourage it as a way to go about creating the sound files for this work, but you would be creating them yourself if you're doing the recording. But if someone else is just sending you sound files, absolutely not allowed, even if you're intending to process them in some way. So make sure you're including sounds that you've created yourself. What else? The assignment template's available right now. I'll fork it so I might make I'll fork it into my own, so many namespaces to choose from. I'm going to make an internal a public project. No, I can only make an internal. I'm making it internal. Your version should be private for your own assignment, but I'm going to make it internal so that I can share an example with you later when I create it, based on what we're going to do today. So let's talk about what we're going to do today. We've had these slides already about sound, learning to use P5.js as sound library, P5 sound.js, P5 sound, I forgot what it's called. And we looked at a few different kinds of objects that are available within this sound library, particularly the synthesis objects and the sample playback objects. I'm going to talk for a little while about sound art, how sound interacts with art, and different approaches to that over the 20th century. And then we'll go back and make another example and see if we can use a few more of these synthesis techniques to create a sound artwork. So, by the way, if you want to take a whole course on computer music next year, you can. Sound and Music Computing, COMP1720. This is going to run in first semester 2023. So take a look at that. If you're up to that stage in your degree, if you're a third or fourth year student, come and do some sound and music computing with me. It'll be super fun. Where's my sound art bit? Here we go. Art theory, sound art. So the question here is, can sound be used as a material in art? That's the question about sound art. And I guess you might say, well, wait a minute, isn't that music? Isn't the artworks made of sound music? But there is a difference. And I think over the 20th century, there was an expansion of what we could understand art to be. And there was similarly an expansion of what we could understand music to be. And sometimes there are sound things that aren't quite music. They don't quite seem like they fit with what we would expect music to be. And sometimes we feel like they're more like artworks separate from music. So one example of that is, well, what if we had a piece of music which was really, really long? And it was so long that in fact it plays forever. And you're actually only going to be able to listen to it in a specific location. So you go into a specific location, which we could call a gallery, and listen to this piece of music, which is going to play forever and is changing all the time. And really that's more like an art experience, right? You're going into a gallery, seeing an artwork, which is there on the wall forever, having that experience of reflecting on it, and then you go away and take your memory or understanding of that artwork with you. So it's taking sound and using it to create something more like art. Music has a lot of cultural loaded information about it. There's different styles of music, different kinds of music. Music works with specific occasions. music has certain kinds of instruments, certain timbres, certain kinds of rhythms, certain kinds of volumes, and often a certain length. So there are some things that if you start to change those variables, you get to have sonic experiences, I get, or temporal sonic experiences, which start to go beyond what we would normally expect from music. And people start to call it sound art after that. So, how can we do some sound art in P5? I guess is a question for today. But what is sound art, and what has where has that conversation been over the last 100 years, I suppose? So we're talking about synthesizers and how people can use different kinds of electronic sounds as well, because electronic sounds really started to break expectations about how sound should work. Before we had electronic synthesizers, if you wanted to create a new sound, you had to have a musician and a musical instrument. And you could record that, and then it would play back exactly what there was before. And synthesizers allowed folks to have a much broader range of sounds and to create new sounds from scratch along the way. So the process of inventing the sound came together with the process of composing sounds together, came together with the process of listening and performing to sound. So all of these jobs started getting jumbled up: the job of composer, performer, audience, and instrument creator, or luthier. So this is just an image of a quite famous composer of electronic music called Eliane Radigue, born in 1932, and this is a photo from the 1970s. I guess we could play a bit of Eliane Radigue's music if you're interested in it. This is, I wonder when this one's from, Trilogie de la Mort. When was it from? Oh yeah, 1994, so later in Eliane Radigue's career. Just play back a little bit of Eliane Radigue. Is it going to play back through my sound? No. There it is. I wonder if we're getting it. Oh yeah, you're getting a bit of Eliane Radigue there. So notice the length of this work. It's an hour long. It's a whole album just in one piece of music. Just listen to a minute or so. So I don't want to get too many content strikes, so I'll stop it right there. Eliane Radigue's work, Kaima. So synthesizers were breaking expectations about how music should work together. And this was a sort of 70s view about how synthesizers work, a kind of big rack of electrical equipment. For a while, synthesizers looked quite differently, and we got a lot of synthesizers built into computers, and now a lot of folks are playing big racks of electrical equipment again. Things come around and change over time. Another exciting thing that happened in the 20th century to do with creating sound was the invention of tape as a medium for recording sound. Invention of tape. Why was tape an important invention? Well, people could record sound for a long time for quite a while before the 20th century. The original phonographs, I've forgotten when they were invented, sometime in the 19th century. Popularized in America, recording sound, mass manufacture of wax cylinders, recorded sound. It was a way to reproduce sound and get it out to everyone. The problem with a wax cylinder and a phonograph is that you can only record the sound and you can't change it. You can't take the wax cylinder and cut it up and put it together with another one. So people were after other ways of recording sound or experimenting with other ways of recording sound and interested in the possibilities then of being able to change the sound after it's been recorded. So there were lots of different ideas of doing this, ways of doing it with light, so you could like color in things on a strip of film when people had discovered, had been working in cinema. They were interested in how you could use light to represent an electrical signal and use that to create sound with a synthesizer or just a speaker playing it back. People were interested in recording with magnetic signals and originally using a wire to record the changing electrical field from a magnet connected to a microphone, allowing you to make a recording on a wire. And then eventually the really popular way of doing this was to get a strip of tape with a kind of magnetic stuff stuck to it, very light magnetic stuff, so it's still very flexible. And you would be able to, as this tape is moving, it would be able to store some of the magnetism of a tape head that was emitting an electrical signal, changing through time. So once you have that, the cool thing about tape is that you can cut it up and stick it back together again. So folks in studios started to get tape recorders with these big reels of tape. Here's a little tape recorder with 2 little reels there. There's probably a big one on the wall behind them, but they're all in the way. People started to experiment with how you could get tapes together. By the way, people experimented with records and phonographs as well, but it wasn't as exciting. The tape stuff really took off, and this was an after World War II technology. So post World War II in Europe, people were starting to experiment with tape, and particularly these folks on the screen right now, the guy in the middle is called Pierre Schaeffer, was working in a French musician working in a group called the Musique Concrète Research Group. They were talking about concrete music, musique concrète. Why were they calling it concrete music? Because it was music made of recorded sounds. They were composing something that was going to be static by taking these recordings and putting them together. So beforehand, if you were composing something, it had to be played back by performers, so it would change each time. Now they could compose with tape so that it would be absolutely static each time. Every time they played it back, it would be the same. I've got a link to YouTube here of another one of Pierre Schaeffer's works called Etude des Bruits. It's about trains. So it was just recordings of trains sliced together to create a piece of music. So please have a listen to that and see what Pierre Schaeffer was doing in 1948, just after the end of World War II, with tape. This is photos taken much later in the 1970s, but you can still see the big racks of electrical equipment was part of the electronic music making experience in the middle of the 20th century. Totally different approach now. So these folks like Eliane Radigue, folks like Schaeffer were thinking about creating new music with the best electronic equipment folks had to offer. Different approach to composition was happening in the United States, in New York, around the same time, in the 50s, post-war era. And there was a composer called John Cage, who was one of the leading artists in an experimental music school called the New York School. So a bunch of composers doing quite experimental things with sound. And John Cage is very famous for this particular piece called 4 minutes and 33 seconds. Here is the score, the lines for the performer to play. And there are no notes in this piece. It is a piece composed of specific lengths of silence. So that's a dramatic kind of interpretation of how to create a piece of music. John Cage was taking the bits of music that we would do, following instructions on a score, but not including any notes. So it was only the kind of score instructions that are part of this piece. Very famous piece of music. John Cage wrote a lot of other music which did have notes in it, so it's not like he was like the silence guy, although this is a very famous work, but certainly experimenting a lot with new kinds of instruments with percussion, combining dance and music to create different kinds of experiences, and creating music with phonographs and record players. So there would be pieces where you're supposed to put on a record or put on a radio and change the station slowly over time, including those kinds of sounds within music. You can see a performance here of Cage in the 70s. I guess he's got a little watch there. There's a link to that video. You can check it out. Literally, the only action in this piece is to open and close the piano lid, I believe. to indicate the different movements. Another John Cage work, and a more sonic one, but not one including instruments, was this idea of sounds around us, the water walk piece. I guess I'll find this on YouTube because it is pretty good. I'll try to mute it so we don't get ads. I should have bought a YouTube subscription. Oh, we get to see it. Okay, we'll see a bit of Water Walk.
Contains water, and because I walk during its performance.
Where's the sound?
That figures, doesn't it? Now, also, two things I want you to notice. Over here, Mr. Cage has a tape recording machine, which will provide much of the... Will you touch the machine so we can know where it is? Which will provide much of the background. Also, he works with a stopwatch. The reason that he does this is because these sounds are in no sense accidental in their sequence. They each must fall mathematically at a precise point. So he watches his watch as he works. He takes it seriously. I think it's interesting. If you are amused, you may laugh. If you like it, you may buy the recordings. John Cage and Water Walk.
Okay, that's enough John Cage. Watering the plant in the bath. A famous part of the piece. So, what is the sound created by here? Well, lots of objects that John Cage could find, and a microphone to pick up the sounds. And some of the sounds were from a traditional instrument. There's a piano as one of the main instruments, but he's not playing it like a piano. He's reaching inside and messing with the strings to make these resonating sounds, and then using objects around to create the performance. John Cage is a bit of a wild person, really. Very interesting thinker, and very interested in how folks would experience sound. He was very interested in silence and spent some time trying to understand silence by sitting in anechoic chambers. So these are chambers designed for absorbing as much sound as possible for testing equipment. And John Cage would sit in it and just experience the quietest sounds you could imagine. And even then, in that experience, there are sounds because our bodies create sound. You can start to hear blood pulsing in your ears, hear your heartbeat, hear just the slightest movements that your body that you can't control. So there's always sound as part of our experience, even if we want something to be completely silent. What other ways can we experience sound? And we're now moving more towards sound art rather than experimental music. This is a work by Michael Asher, an installation of a gallery space that was just look out towards the street. So the experience here for the viewer would be of being inside a concrete room with one external opening and seeing cars go by, hearing the world around you, seeing this little window into the world. So the sound and the vision of that experience was the work of art in this point, a different way of framing the experience of art. Lamont Young, another very important experimental music composer from the kind of mid 20th century period. Lamont Young and other collaborators, in this case Marian Zazela, designed different kinds of long form sound experiences. So this artwork was called Dream House, which would include sound in lots of different locations and lights to illuminate the area in specific ways. So it was an installation, I think in New York City. So it was exploring how synthesized sounds created with different kinds of musical equipment that Lamont Young was creating and recording could interact with light and experience inner space. So I guess our challenge today is to use a few of these ideas in a interactive sound work that I've started already in P5.js. And we're going to start with a bit of the use of sound files as a raw material. So I want to take sound files as a raw material and create an interactive music work. I'm going to need a sound file. I should have thought of this before. I didn't quite have that, get that far ahead. But we'll get there. So we looked a little bit at this last week, but I'm going to look again. How do you load up a sound file? So p5.sound has this command called load sound, and then you have to give it the address of the sound that you want to load. In this case, I've got a sketch here. I'm just going to create a folder called assets. So I've got my sound files in that folder, and I'll actually open up one I prepared last week. I should save it first. Save. I'll open up a sketch and get the sound file because I forgot to provide that. I want to download it. It won't let me. No. Unilodge.mp3, where are you? I'll find another sound file. github.com/cpm percussion/computer music intro. I just happen to know where I've got a sound file somewhere. I think I've got one in here. Not there. Oh yeah, field recording 30 seconds. A .wav file. I don't really want a .wav file, but that's okay. Downloading it. Cool. And just get this sorted out. Just give me a second. If you just excuse me for a second, I'll take a short break and just make sure this sounds in the right format. So, ready for the break music? Here it comes. And I'm back. Sorry, I just had to make sure I got that right. I've got an MP3 file now. And if I actually just go to my files, when you're dealing with sound files, a lot of the time you download ones that end up in this format called .wav format. And .wav files are fine, but they're uncompressed audio. So it's going to be a little bit challenging to include them in your GitLab repositories. So I'd really prefer if you used a .mp3 file or some other compressed audio format that works with P5. MP3 is, I guess, a good choice. So try to figure out whatever way you can to convert a WAV file to an MP3 file. That is up to you, so that you can include it within your project. So over in the P5 editor, I'm just going to upload a file into my assets folder. I'll upload that field recording 30 seconds.mp3. and we're going to get started with it. It's uploaded now. That's great. So I've got my MP3 file. I can now load that up into my sketch in the setup. Now I've already started this sketch that we're going to work on today. And I started it because I wanted to have some kind of abstract artwork starter to work with and add some sound, but I haven't added any sound to it yet. So let's just have a look at what it looks like right now. It's basically something that I started with the fireflies that we worked on a few weeks ago. And I wanted to think about how I could change those fireflies to feel like some kind of interacting objects. So I can move these a little bit, push them around, and they fade in and out and overlap, and they've got different colors. It's similar to the Firefly code, but a little bit changed. Ooh. Anyway, so right now there's no sound, but I need to load up a sound. So I'm going to take this, I'll add this into my setup. Should probably put that in preload, I think. Should I be putting in preload? I think so. Function preload. And I'm going to say let field recording equal load sound assets field recording 30 seconds. That was what it's called, right? Field recording 30 seconds.mp3. So my artwork should load again. I still am not playing back the sound, but I've loaded up an MP3 that I've uploaded into the sketch here in the P5 editor. So what do we do next? Now that we've got a sound stored, we can do a few things with it. We can play it, we can pause it, we can resume it and stop it. So it's like we've got a tape recorder right now, and there's those 4 buttons on the top. You've probably never seen a tape recorder in your life. Tape recorder. Like there's a bunch of, yeah, here's a classic kind of tape recorder. I just want to see the image right now. What have we got? We've got buttons here. Show me that image full screen. I need to see the whole thing. This is like a really bad kind of modern remake of a classic kind of tape recorder design. There's the play button, you put the tape in there. Play button, rewind, fast forward, stop, pause. If you press pause again, it unpauses. And then record, if you press record and play at the same time, it will start recording from a microphone. So obviously it's not actually retro because it has a USB port for some reason. I'm not sure why it would have that. There's an actual one. Panasonic, that looks like an actual old tape recorder. By the way, if you're in some old rooms at ANU, you might see a tape recorder quite like that attached to the wall, because when folks used to record lectures, they would actually record the lecture on a cassette tape, and the lecturer would have a little microphone attached to them. It wouldn't be like this wireless, it would be on a very long wire plugged into the tape recorder, and they'd have to hang it around their neck on a little dorky looking necklace. But you'd be able to record the tapes, and the tapes would go to the ANU library so that folks could listen to them afterwards if they missed the lecture. And some people really relied on that. Okay, where was I up to? I want to play this sound. So I've forgotten exactly where we got to last time, but just for kicks, I'm going to make sure we play this sound. Field recording, dot play. I don't even know what the sound is. Some kind of field recording I made. Well, there it is. I recorded it, so I should know. Well, that's it. Look, I don't know what that sound is, but it's probably something interesting. It's got some interesting stuff in there. There's some music, there's some traffic sounds, there's some people speaking. Probably recorded outside in a kind of city environment with different things going on. So we can use these playback controls to kind of give us a tape recorder style interaction with this sound. We can also use the .play sound to the .play method of the sound file object to create kind of notes with this. We can cue it up to a certain start place and just give us a smaller duration. So I guess we could, I'll just take this in and I'm going to instead of saying .play, we'll have the start time as like random, I think it's 30 seconds long, so I'll just have a random number, a random integer between 0 and 20, or a random number. The rate can be 1.0, the amp can be 1.0, Q start, I don't know what Q start is. I have to look it up in the p5js.org. Remember what that is. Sound file. .play, where's the details of that method? There's so many methods for sound file, so many different things you can do. Q start time in seconds, I think it's the number of seconds before it starts to play. 0, and then I want the duration to be less like 2 seconds or something. And the duration is going to be 2. Oh, 2 dots. That's not going to work, is it? Did it work? That's weird. I had to load. Strange. Interesting. I'm not sure why that's doing it that way. Well, anyway, you can explore more with the sound file .play button. Hopefully you find that there's something interesting about that, because what I really don't want to hear in the sound artworks is what I just did, which was to just get a sound file and just loop it all the time. You need to interact with the sound file and not just use it as a sound effect, but use it as a material in your artwork. So what else have we got here? This user start audio thing, I think that's built in now. Some browsers are funny about auto playing music, so I think P5 used to have this little trick to help where you would use a start audio with the mouse pressed, but I don't think it's required anymore. Maybe it is required. Anyway, I'll add my audio play into mouse pressed, so I can just experiment with different ways to play it. What were I'll just copy this in so I remember. .play, start time, rate, amp, Q start. Start time is the scheduled playback time. The Q start time is the time inside the sound file. Silly me. I had it the wrong way around. That should be 0. Rate, amp, Q start, and duration. So now it's just playing a little bit. I might change the rate as well. Random, -1, 1. So it's got different, the rate is the rate of the sound file being played back. So you can imagine a tape moving across a tape head. As you slow down the movement of that tape, the sound file the sound will get slower, but also lower in pitch. Because of the way sound works, pitch and speed are related. If you take a waveform and slow it down, stretch it out, the pitch is going to be lower. So we can adjust pitch and speed together with the rate change. And then if I actually get a minus number, the tape is moving backwards, so it'll be in reverse. Might do it a little bit more than 1 each time. Minus 1.2 and plus 1.2. Maybe I really only want it to be minus 0.5 to minus 0. Or plus 0.1. I just want it slow and mainly backwards. So it's going to be pretty weird sounds now. Turn up my volume here. Cool. Okay. One of the problems with our sound file right now is that the sound kind of clips at the start and the end. So if I click, it will exist, but the sound starts straight away, and when it gets to the end of the 2 seconds of sound file, it just cuts off. Very long samples now because I think it takes the duration from the unstretched part of the sound file. I'll start it again just to stop that. Here we go. Now where's my sound? There it is. So you could hear the volume go straight up, then the sound file would play, then straight down. So I'd like to do a bit of composition with this material. Like you don't want your sounds to be a surprise. Maybe you want them to slowly come in and slowly fade away. So I can do that by changing the volume over time. And we talked a little bit about this last week, but I'll go into more detail about how it works. We're going to do an envelope, and an envelope is an object in p5.sound that lets us change a parameter in a different audio object. So we're going to use this envelope to change the volume of that tape recorder, and it's as if we're having an object which will have its hand on the volume knob, slowly turning it up and then slowly turning it down. So I'll just copy this in. When we're setting up our sound, in setup, not in preload, we'll make a new envelope. Make it control our field recording. So what we're going to do now is have the field recording playing all the time, and whenever we want to hear it, we will change its rate and set the envelope to start turning it up and turning it down over time. So we're setting the field recording to loop, we're setting it to play forever, and we're setting its volume to be 0. And then we set the input of the envelope to be the field recording. Actually going to change that name to be field envelope, field env. And we'll put the play somewhere else. I think we went through this a little bit last time, but I want to go through it again here, just so that we're clear about how these things ought to work. And whenever we do mouse pressed, we will change field recordings. Is it called field record? No, capital R. Field recording dot rate random, the same thing, minus 0.5 to 0.1. So they're very small now. Maybe I will need that user-started audio thing. It seems like I missed the first one. User-started audio. To be honest, I'm never quite clear on how these audio libraries, what they're up to with regards to controlling the browser's audio. Browsers are a tricky target. I still missed the first click, but oh well. We get the second click. So I've got something playing, but I'd really like that envelope to be a little bit longer. So I'm going to change its setup. Go look for envelope. Envelope. We talked a little bit about the time of an envelope in the week 6 lecture, how you'd start with the attack phase of an envelope as it's coming up, then kind of a sustain phase, maybe a decay phase, it goes down a little bit. And then finally, when you want the sound to go away, there's a release phase. So we should be able to change the attack time and release time of our envelope. And I might do that randomly so that it's different each time. So our field of dot attack time equals random. Is that a method or a field? We can just change it, I think. Time equals random. I guess the minimum I want is 0.1 and the maximum I want is 2, and this is measured in seconds. Field env dot release time equals, and the same. Minimum 0.1, maximum 2. So sometimes it might be a quite long sound, sometimes it's a short sound. It doesn't seem to be making a difference. I've probably done something wrong with my envelope. Set input, set exp, play, trigger attack, trigger release. Set ADSR. Where is my envelope? Oh, okay. I'll just do it that way in one. ADSR controls all of the stages of the envelope simultaneously. So I'm going to change the attack time here. Whoop. I have to be a little bit careful with myself because sometimes I use the decay time I really don't mind about, and the sus percent. It can be 100. Sometimes I use music software where time is measured in milliseconds, so all of your sounds would have to be multiplied by 1,000 to get to seconds, or divided by 1,000. Yeah. That's a bit better, isn't it? We get some really weird sounds now. Very weird, slow sounds. That's just what I like, weird sounds. Okay, so we've made a kind of a note out of a sound file. A note that is controlled with our mouse and has this kind of random speed, random pitch, and slightly random shape of the note over time. It's a different length each time. So that's cool. We might use it somewhere else in our sketch a little bit later. But let's just keep going through a few examples. Our sound files and orders, we've done that. I'll show you a few more things, or talk about a few more things. some folks ask about recording sounds in P5, and it's definitely something you can do. P5 has an audio in object. You can use P5 audio in and a object called the sound recorder to access a microphone and record a sound in time. Folks, it is a little bit dangerous doing this. You've got to be very careful with this technique. Using the microphone, you can definitely record sounds. You can definitely use a microphone to sample something inside P5 and then play it back, but it's the unpredictable input. You don't know what sounds are around the person viewing your artwork, and particularly in a class environment, you might expect this to be on a wall in a gallery or something, but actually it's being marked by a tutor, you know, at 2 a.m. in their share house, right? And maybe they can't make any sound. So it's potentially thinking about what your environment is. You don't know when someone is going to be viewing this. If it's just a website online sent as or as an assignment. So you might be a little bit, it might be risky to assume that there's a certain kind of fun sound available, right? Like people are not necessarily going to be opening up your sketch in a room full of musical instruments, having the ability to play them at any volume. So yeah, like a little bit of a tricky technique to use. Certainly can be very effective, but I've certainly also seen a bunch of major projects where someone flashes on the screen text like, "Scream into the microphone." And I'm like, well, no, I'm not going to do that. My baby is having a nap. I'm not going to scream right now. Next assignment, right? So it obviously leaves a bad taste in my mouth sometimes to be required to do some kind of sound thing within the context of a classroom assignment. So definitely a time and a place for recording sounds. I love recording sounds in live performance works, but this kind of assignment, not exactly, a bit dangerous is all I'll say. Managing the sonic experience for your user. I love this image. It was a rehearsal for a gig that I did a long time ago now, something like 13 years ago. You can see my old laptop. I'm just going on a nostalgia trip right now. My old laptop, this one was a MacBook, plastic MacBook, but it was in the black color. You had to pay extra to get it in black. It was so cool. Love that computer. And my friend, Chisha, had a cool thing that she'd made with a webcam at the bottom and would pick up sounds from this opaque panel with a brush and a little ball and a Wiimote to control it, and would also see where her hands were over it to control sounds. So what a cool performance. But the point of this is to say that you need to think about how folks interact with the sounds in your work, as well as how they interact with the visual parts. So in this instance, in this artwork, I was thinking a lot about how me and my friend would be interacting with different sounds to create a performance, but in your context, it's the viewer creating their own sounds. So you have to think about what sounds they're going to hear, how they'll work together, and how they would be able to experiment with them to create an interesting result. And I don't really know what this slide means. Record, generate, project. I feel like it's a slide from a previous version of these slides, but it's got a cool picture of some synths going on, so that's something to think about. A few more examples before we get back to working on my little interactive sound artwork. Janet Cardiff's audio walks. So these are, the idea of an audio walk is to think deeply about field recording as an artistic practice. So field recording is when you have a sound recorder. It's usually called a field recorder from like the world of audio, of radio, right? You could have a recorder in the studio, a studio recorder, and then you have a recorder that you take in the field. So it would be a portable tape recorder. Of course, now they work with an SD card, not a tape, unless you're specifically into tape, I guess. But folks could take a field recorder, press record, and just go for a walk, and the sounds around them end up baked into the recording, and that kind of becomes a sound artwork. So just as example, I wonder if we'll actually get any. Ooh,
Hello, Whitechapel Library, Bradley speaking.
Probably should.
I'm standing in the library with you.
You can hear the turning of newspaper pages. People talking softly.
I think in this
There's a man standing beside me.
Cardiff,
He's looking in the crime section now.
not only is in the environment, but also narrating the story. So it's an interesting way to do it.
Leafs through a few pages, then puts it back on the shelf.
You could do that if you wanted in your interactive sound art work, record your own voice. Another example, Runar Magnusson and Tor Magnusson. Thor Magnussen's quite heavyweight in computer music, thinking a lot about live coding. He works in Iceland. But these folks worked on different kinds of software combining audio and visuals in their works. I won't go click through the link, I'll just keep moving. Another really inspirational example, Brian Eno, another mid-century male composer. Sorry about that. I got a decent chunk of diversity into these slides, but anyway, I'll talk about Brian Eno, a very important ambient music composer, sometimes I guess called the originator of the idea of ambient music. And one of the early albums that he created in this style was called Ambient 1 Music for Airports. So Brian Eno was thinking about music that would be appropriate in an airport and created it by recording on a tape lots of different sounds created with instruments, then playing the tapes at different rates and working together with them in a live environment. So the sound of music for airports is very relaxing, very slow, very ambient, inventing what that would mean. But again, using tapes over time, changing the speed, playing them back in different times, exactly what you can do with P5. So you can create something like Brian Eno's ambient music if you wanted to as part of your work. This paper, this performance, something by me, Charles, and my friend Chisha. This was, I guess, the performance that we got to after experimenting with those earlier systems. I'll get a bit on YouTube so you can see what it's like. This wasn't really an interactive media work, but to do with a specific kind of performance environment, using a camera to track our locations and use our shape of our hands above some instruments, in this case some drums, and combining that with synthesized sounds. So just to play back a little bit of this. Sorry, the volume's very low. I should have mastered this recording better, but that's what you got. This was a long time ago now. It was at a time when people were really excited about how to use projectors and cameras together. So projectors were getting to be pretty cheap to work with computers, and cameras were getting pretty cheap and pretty useful working with computers. So it's part of my kind of input with Chisha about how to use these things to create a piece of music. This might look sort of like P5. It's not P5, it's a related system called Open Frameworks that we were using. Let's skip ahead a bit to a different part. That's enough. So you can see more, there's some links down here about how this stuff worked, if you're interested. Oh, there was a better demo video. Oh well, we got that one. You can look at it later if you want. Another kind of sound artwork, I guess this is more to do with strictly how the synthesis parts work. It's a work that I created using a synthesis system called Pure Data and a machine learning system I was working on to do with generating multiple kind of real numbers in real time in order to replicate what a person was doing with a control interface like this little array of knobs you can see on the desk in front of me. Let's skip forward a bit. So you can see I was using this interface here in PD to represent what I was doing. Sometimes it's me playing, sometimes it's the neural network playing in this performance. And really, I was using a technique that you might have heard from last time called additive synthesis. I had 8 different oscillators all working together, adding up together with different pitches. And each one of these little knobs would control the pitch of a different oscillator. So it sounds boring, but over the performance I add some effects and some distortion and they start to interact in a different way. Let's get to the good bit. I don't know what the good bit is. Yeah, you can watch the full video. It does go somewhere over time. So I guess that previous video was what I think of when I think of computer music. It's basically inside a computer now, mainly software with some interfaces for a person to use, or just using the keyboard and mouse to control it. But in recent times, music has gone back, or computer music, electronic music, has gone back to what we were seeing in those early 20th century slides with big racks of equipment. So people love big racks of equipment, as it turns out, and they really want to try them again. So here's an example of this performance by this musician, Elaine Vogelsinger, from 2021, using what we call modular synthesizers. So they're modular because they come with lots of different objects, modules, that fit together into a big box. You screw them in, and then you connect the modules with little wires. So one module might be an oscillator, one might be a filter, one might be creating some note signals, one might be an envelope generator. So all of the objects that you might be familiar with from P5.sound, or we've been talking about, come together in these boxes as different modules to work together. So there's a video, I'll just play a little bit of Elaine Vogelsinger performing.
That's a Chromebook with the everything button.
No. Play after ads. I should have had a YouTube Premium subscription. Every year I say this when I want to see a few YouTube videos. It's going to play. I don't need to advertise inside my lecture. Another ad. It's going to begin in 6 seconds. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Here we go. Kind of harks back to the Eliane Radic music we heard at the start of the lecture. So you can see these boxes full of equipment, The scale of things has come down a lot because electronics has gotten smaller. You used to have to take a whole wall of a room to do this stuff. Now we can have quite complicated modular synthesizers just in a little box on the floor, but they're still human scaled, so it's big enough to get your hands in and adjust things manually and make these many connections with all these cool colored patch wires, part of the fun of modular synthesis. So I'm just going to check where we're up to with sounds. A few things to remember, and then we'll go back and make some more sounds in the patch. Sound creates atmosphere, so you can use sound in your major project and specifically in assignment 3 to give a certain kind of vibe, certain kinds of recordings, give a certain impression of what your piece should be about. Sound is spatial, so you can sort of hear a room, hear a space when you're listening to sounds. Field recordings are great because they represent a space as well. You hear the size of the place you are. You hear things around you in different places in your ears in the left and right channels. So I encourage you to try recording some field recordings with your phone. Sound drives interaction. So it's actually adding sound to your work can start to make the interaction feel better and feel more engaging and rewarding, because when you do something, you're rewarded with a sound. And so it makes the action of doing that thing feel more substantial than if it just changes something visually on the screen. And sound can enhance experience, so we can get this a feedback loop of wanting to make sound. People like sound and like music, and you want to experience it and see what's going to happen. So it can drive interaction and enhance experience in that way, which is why I'm making you do it in this assignment. So P5.js can do almost everything you could want with sound. It's not the most advanced sound library. There are other options in the world, one called tone.js and another called Gibber, which we're currently studying we would study in the sound and music computing class, doing more different wild things with sound in JavaScript. So please think about these do's and don'ts when doing your assignment. You have to use sound, so do use it. But don't just play an MP3 back. Try to perform with your sound and transform it to make something unique. And make sure you're thinking about how to enhance the experience and think about whether what you're doing is annoying. So if you we experimented some last week with sound files that were very annoying or synthesized sounds that were super annoying. People don't want to hear them, so don't do that. And some more super cool links. So have a look at that. And we'll think about what we're going to do with our blorbs, my little blorbs and my interactive sound work. I think what I'm going to do this week, a bit different than last time, which is to consider a kind of synthesis called FM synthesis. I've got an example I'll bring up in a minute about FM synthesis. So if you've got any questions right now, please chuck them in the chat. Otherwise, I'm going to start FM synthesizing these blorbs and create something that should be interesting. Where's my FM synthesis example? I've got half an hour, so it's enough time for some FM synthesis to happen. Probably my collections. FM synthesis, here we go. FM synth. So what have I got here? The idea of FM synthesis, so I'll go back to the slide. I did have a slide about it sometime in the past. Just trying to find my FM slide. Oh, here's the idea. So the idea for FM synthesis is that you have multiple oscillators and one oscillator controls the signal of the other one. So we could have a carrier oscillator, which is the actual sound we hear, and a modulator oscillator, which is controlling the frequency of the other sound. And what we end up with when we do that is a really complicated sound using only two oscillators. So it's thought of to be like a sort of computationally cheap technique because you need a small number of oscillators to get a very cool sound. And you can actually make some super wild sounds, which is what I'm going to go for in a minute, just using a couple of oscillators and getting them to interact in interesting ways. So I've got an example here that I created. I've got a carrier. That's my new P5 oscillator triangle. It's got a frequency of 220, amplitude of 0, and we just started running. And then I make another one, a modulator, going to be a triangle wave. That one's going to start, and I'm going to disconnect it from sound. So it's not going to be coming out the speaker at this point. Then I'm going to set a modulation frequency and a modulation depth. So these are both changes to the parameters of my modulating oscillator. Now the modulating oscillator isn't connected to the speaker, so you can change the amplitude of it to be a number bigger than 1, and it's not going to distort. And that's really useful because I'm going to need to have it as a very high number to actually get something useful. Let's just hear what this sounds like. I'll press start and we'll hear it. Oh, that's cool, isn't it? So far, it's modulating quite slowly. You can see the modulation frequency is just 1. If I start changing this and run it again, so far so good. Still just sounds like a little siren, doesn't it? It's starting to sound a little bit more like not just disconnected sounds, but like one sound. Even more connected. I'm just going to jump now to 20. We'll jump to 25. Ooh, you start to hear that there's apparent other frequencies happening now. Very similar frequency. The carrier is 220, so I'll make this 222. You get something weird, probably. And if they go way above, you get these weird ringing sounds. I might change the amplitude a bit of the modulation. Have them as an almost even number, even multiple of the frequency, we get sounds which are usually a little bit more tonal. Anyway, so you can experiment with those, the modulation frequency and the modulation depth, to get different kinds of sounds, and that's what we're going to do in my other sketch. I'm not quite sure how I'm going to do it, so we'll just have to have a think. Whoop. Uh-oh. What I would like to do, I'm just going to copy that. Open my blobs. And I'm going to have a new setup function. I've got a lot of blob properties set up right here in this object, but I really just want to set up each blob's sound. So each blob is going to get a sound associated with it. Function setup blob synth. I just want to put it in a function so I know what's happening. Sorry, I thought I was writing Python for a minute. So each blob is going to get a carrier and a modulator. And it's going to have the amplitude of 0 until such time as something changes. And I'm going to say b.carrier. The blob is going to get the carrier, and the blob is going to get the modulator. So this is why I'm going to have a limited number of blobs in my sketch right now, because I don't want them to all have the same, to overload the CPU or overload my browser, and I want them to have different sounds. So they'll start out with a random frequency, random 100 to 600. And the modulator will start with a random frequency as well. Random 100 to 1200. And the modulation index will start at a random index as well. Random what should I do? 50 to 200 or something. And then for each of my blobs, they're going to have to have their synth set up. Blob, setup, blob, synth. Oops, spell it correctly, Charles. Blob. So let's see if I have any errors so far. Nope, that's not right. Ah, B.modulator. So I've still got my music concrete sounds, but I'm going to leave them for the moment. And as my blobs are changing, I'm going to change their amplitude. So every time I draw my blob, I end up with a new level of alpha for that blob. So I'm going to make sure that my amplitude is something connected to alpha. So alpha is going to be between 0 and 100. So I can just divide it by 100 to get a number between 0 and 1. And I think when you're changing the amplitude of an oscillator, we can give it a time. Oscillator, amplitude, over a number of seconds. So I just want to give it a little ramp there, over 100th of a second. I think the maximum frame rate is something like 60, so 100th of a second is still less than a frame, but it's just going to give it a little, just make sure everything is smoothed out about our changes to the amplitudes. Turn it down a little bit, you're probably getting blown away. Now we're getting something like that Eliana DP something. That wasn't too hard. It's a couple of FM synthesizers. Now what I need is a bit of interaction. Might turn it down even more. It's still a little bit loud. As I move them, I'd really like them to change in some way. Change their carrier frequency and their modulator frequency a little bit. It doesn't really matter what that frequency is it? Does it? I feel like I'm doing something incorrect here. I haven't added anything to my modulator frequency. It's not quite fully FM at this point. I think I had a better example of FM. I'm missing something. I'm changing the frequency to be the modulator's frequency. But normally you would add another frequency in there, so I'm not doing the adding of the carrier frequency. Where was my proper FM synthesis patch? This one? Modulator.add. Ask freak. So I can add a constant to the modulator. That's what I want. Yeah. Back to my blobs. I'll give a carrier frequency here. 100, 600. B dot carrier frequency. Cool. So now my carrier frequency is set somewhere. I might actually, don't know if I need to have that there. I can change it later. Maybe I will do it here, just so I know where that is stored. Oh dear, something's not right here. Left 51 modulator, our B dot modulator. Of course. Sorry, P5. Now I've lost my sounds. Ooh. Getting my stuff right. Getting these. FM synthesis is tricky. You've got to play around with parameters to try to get something that seems right. So if you're playing with this, and you'll have this code available to you, and feel free to cite it and use it in your work, but make sure you play around with the values to get something that sounds good to you. Now we're getting a bit better. Oh, that's cool. So I've got a couple of things, but I want to get some interaction to happen so that it actually makes sense to move them around. I think what I'll do is use my movements to also affect those frequencies. So I've already got, in the interactive blob, I've already got this bit of code which is letting me push them around a little bit as I get close to their center. I'm going to use those movements to help adjust my sound. So I think I'll say let X move. I'll save the value that I'm moving each time. Let Y That's very loud now. I gotta stop that. Need to tune my FM synth a little bit more. Let x minus equal x move, and let y or b dot y minus equal y move. Okay, and then I'm going to change b dot modulator dot add. Change its carrier frequency. I'll change the carrier frequency and then update it. That sounds better. It's going to be minus equal to x move. Might only be a few pixels, but it's probably okay. We'll see how it goes. And then I'll update the addition to the modulator frequency. I wonder if I can do that over 100th of a frame as well. I'm also going to change the modulator frequency. So carrier freak and modulator freak. Get that in. B dot modulator .01. So I'm going to change my carrier frequency and my modulation frequency, and this could be pretty cool. We'll find out. Modulator freak minus equal y move. Don't know what it's going to be like. The magic of interactive art. You never quite know until you try it. Oh boy. Cannot read and disconnect. Doesn't sound good, does it? Probably of null can't be read. Things without that change. Whoa, no. Everything's going wrong. What have I done? Well, it's got a problem with p5.sound, which is unlikely to be my fault. But what have I done to cause it to have that problem? Feel like I wasn't doing anything particularly obscene. Weird. You allowed to ramp ads? Add a value to the P5 oscillator's output amplitude. I'm just going to experiment a bit to see which bit is causing it to break completely. Is it this bit or is it the second bit? The second bit seems fine. Here to be big. But this changing the add was not happy, was it? Have I done something weird with add? Clues? I can't see what I've done wrong. I cannot see what I've done wrong. carrier freq modulator.add. Weird. Oh well. Can't do that. I guess I'll not change the carrier frequency. I'm sure I had an example where I was doing that. I'll just have a look and see what is going wrong with my examples. FM. That one was already there. Mystery. Envelope sounds. Did I have a synth here? No. Well, that's cool too. Well, anyway, I've got my example with an FM synth where I can change the carrier frequency, and I'll just work a little bit more on that to get something cool happening with it. They're coming in and out of focus over time. I'll make it really obvious. We'll see if I can make it very obvious and get rid of this one. Keep updating that thing, but not use it. Doesn't feel like it's changing that much, does it? Can change the amp as well. I'll add the amplitude as a modulator amp as another parameter. What I have 0.2 to 1.5. So I'm updating now a different parameter, b.modulatorAmp. Either going up or down. That sounds a bit better. Make it smooth it out. I just wanted something to actually feel like it was moving. Some kind of interactive sound artwork. I think I need to do a bit more work on this one before it's ready for prime time. But what have I done here? Well, I've created a system where I have a number of objects. I've got my blobs, these circles that are pulsing in and out, changing their alpha value. And as they're changing the alpha value, I'm changing the volume of a synthesizer associated with each one. So for every one, they've got a modulator and a carrier oscillator wired up to create an FM synthesis algorithm. I'm changing those values, and we're hearing them come in and out over time. I just have 3, we'll get maybe a different kind of sound. And then as I move them around the screen, I can just push them a little bit. I can't control them directly, but I can influence them a little bit, which is sometimes a little bit more fun. Let them go in different places. And then create a create an impact on the unfolding composition. So the composition itself keeps going, fading in and out, different sounds interacting, but I can adjust it over time, make small adjustments, and hopefully get some kind of enhanced experience, right? That's the goal. So I'm going to leave it there. I will supply in the chat in a minute a link to this artwork so far. I didn't work that much with the field recordings, but they're still there. There's some way to integrate those with the blobs. I have some blobs that are field recording blobs instead of FM synthesis blobs. I don't know. So we've got a big experimental challenge for this upcoming assignment. I'm really excited to see what you're going to come up with. You'll have a lot of fun in the labs this week playing with sound in P5. Look at the examples that I'm going to send out to you as well for some inspiration. And folks, I will catch you in 2 weeks, not next week because I'm away, the week after that. So not for quite a while, but you've got plenty to do in the labs. You'll have a guest lecture next week. I'll say goodbye in a second once I manage to get my goodbye saying iPad ready to go. Catch you in a few weeks, folks. Outro.